Hello, this is Farah Douglas, President and CEO of the Liver Health Foundation. Welcome and thank you for joining us this evening. Our webinar tonight is dedicated to a very important topic: alcohol, drugs, and your liver. Like you, we have many questions about consumption of drugs and alcohol. Just how many drinks are safe for our livers? How about over-the-counter drugs, painkillers, the sleeping pills, and the list goes on and on. We have dedicated the whole hour to this topic to answer some of these questions. While we won't have time to address all the questions you may have, we will try to cover the major topics. Please note, tonight's presentation is not a substitute for consultation with your own physician and hepatologist. Now, a few words about Liver Health Foundation. We are a California-based 501c3 entity. Our mission is to provide updated and accurate liver health information to the community through free webinars such as tonight's program. To see the complete list of our 2022 programs and events, please visit our website at liverhealthfoundations.org. I want to thank Dr. Arpan Patel for being the presenter for tonight's program. It's important to mention that our presenters are volunteering their time, talent, and expertise to help liver patients through these webinars. We thank our physicians for their support. It is now my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker. Dr. Patel, MD, PhD, faculty at UCLA Bauchi and Tamar Manoukian Division of Digestive Diseases, Assistant Clinical Professor, David Geffen School of Medicine, UCLA, Staff Hepatologist at West Los Angeles VA Medical Center, Center for Healthcare Innovation, Implementation and Policy Investigator at VA, Greater LA Healthcare System. Dr. Patel earned his medical degree from Jefferson Medical College, where he graduated summa cum laude and was awarded membership in Alpha Omega Alpha and the Gold Humanism Honor Society. He went on to complete his education and additional training in internal medicine, gastroenterology, primary care research, and transplant hepatology. In 2020, Dr. Patel joined the faculty at UCLA Bauchi and Tamar Manoukian Division of Digestive Diseases as an assistant clinical professor of medicine. Dr. Patel's research focuses on ways to improve the quality of life for liver patients with chronic liver conditions and as well as for their caregivers. Dr. Patel's research has been published in a number of journals, including Journal of the American Medical Association, Clinical Gastroenterology and Hepatology, Annals of Internal Medicine, Hepatology, Journal of Pain and Symptom Management, and Liver Transplantation. He is an active member of the American Association for the Study of Liver Diseases, AASLD. Dr. Patel, thank you so much for accepting to be our speaker for this important topic. We really appreciate your time, and I know that this will be very popular when we put it on our YouTube and people will enjoy it. Would you please begin your speech?
Absolutely. I will go ahead and share my slides. So thank you again for the opportunity to be speaking to you all. Like Farah had mentioned, a lot of my research is in supporting patients and caregivers, and I think this is a really important topic that we need to talk to with patients and caregivers. So I hope I'm able to answer some of your questions, and I hope you have questions that come up that that I don't know about so that I could read more on my own. But I hope it's a very educational session to everyone. We're going to be breaking this lecture into two pieces. First, we're going to go through a basics over the liver itself and the impact that certain drugs, including prescription drugs and dietary and herbal supplements have on the liver, as well as alcohol. And then the second part of the talk, we're going to be talking about diet and exercise. So the liver is a big organ in the body. It only weighs 3.5 pounds, but it has so many important functions, which I'm sure many people on this presentation know about. Some of its chief functions are shown here. It's one of its big goals is detoxifying things that go through it, and purifying it so that it's safe for in the blood for many metabolites and many different nutrients to go through the body. It also has a big role in making proteins that it manufactures and stores and keeps us healthy and strong. And then a lot of filtration goes through the liver. Blood goes through the liver in large quantities. The liver itself creates and stores bile, which is used to digest many different compounds. And interestingly enough, a fun fact is that it actually also produces hormones that regulate our temperature. So we really can't live without the liver. And I think when we see the liver affected by diseases, we really understand what it does, particularly when it loses function. I wanted to just quickly review some of the major causes of liver disease, which again, many people in the audience here probably know. The largest cause of liver disease currently is fatty liver disease, which can either be from alcohol or non-alcohol related causes, typically obesity and metabolic syndrome. So we'll be focusing on that for a lot of the lecture, but I did also want to mention that viruses like hepatitis B and C and hereditary disorders like the ones shown there are also very common. We're going to be spending some time talking about the effects of certain drugs, herbs, and supplements. While this is not a one of the largest causes of liver disease, it's an important cause because it's something that we can control a little bit more than some of the other conditions. I wanted to also review and provide some insights into what we mean when we talk about liver injury. And for me, what it really comes down to is two simple concepts. One is this idea of chronic injury to the liver. And this is an example shown on the left side that, over time, when you have something like fatty liver disease, you start to get inflammation of the liver and slow development of scar tissue. And eventually you can get cirrhosis. So this is an example of slow chronic injury that can eventually lead to poor liver function. On the flip side, there are also other causes of liver disease that can lead to really quick loss of liver function. We'll be talking about this later in the lecture, but Tylenol-related injury is an example of this. And this is important when you think about your own liver. Before kind of digesting a lot of the information I'm presenting to you, it's important to know whether you have any forms of liver disease before thinking about what medications enter your body. So before even looking at or understanding this information, it's important to know if you have any liver injury and what type it is. So I broke this first part of the talk into 3 different parts. The first is talking about substances, which I'll go into alcohol and cannabis. And in the last 2 sections, I'll be going into prescribed medications, which include over-the-counter medications, and then non-prescribed medications, which include dietary and herbal supplements. And some of these distinctions can seem really small, but I'll try to clarify it the best I can. So alcohol is the most common cause of liver disease in the United States and much of the Western world. And so it's important for us to clarify some basic concepts when it comes to alcohol. It's also important to note that alcohol use generally in our population, whether or not you have liver disease, is very, very common. Almost 3/4 of the population has consumed some form of alcohol over the past year. And so in thinking about the amounts that we should drink, or the maximum amounts that we can drink, it's important to first define what is a standard drink. So these are the amounts shown here, which can seem pretty intuitive. For instance, a can of beer is 1 standard drink, a shot of vodka is 1 standard drink, or of any sort of liquor. sometimes, and as well as a glass of wine, but it's important to note that sometimes we have a tendency to either over or underestimate these amounts. So when we say and when we talk about the number of drinks that are acceptable for our livers, it's important to keep these quantities in mind. So the NIAAA is a association of the government that helps to define standards in terms of how much maximum alcohol consumption is sufficient or dangerous to our health. And these are some of the numbers that are represented here. So you can see that they break it down, alcohol consumption safe limits by women and men. The reason for that is that we do know that alcohol does affect women's liver much more readily than men's liver, and they have less reserve when it comes to injuries. So the limits are different. But generally speaking, you can see that in a day, a woman should not drink more than 3 beverages, and a man should not drink any more than 4. In a week, this goes up to 7 for women and 14 in men. Now, this is all assuming we're talking about a person that doesn't have any underlying liver disease. But in people who have some liver disease, there actually is not an acceptable threshold for alcohol consumption. And particularly in patients who have more advanced liver disease or cirrhosis, we have a strict recommendation to drink no alcohol at all. So I did want to just acknowledge the fact that these limits are for assuming that the person doesn't have any underlying liver disease. I think it's important for us to recognize that because alcohol consumption is very high and has likely increased during the COVID pandemic, at the same time, we're noticing a lot more alcohol misuse and a lot more alcohol use disorder. For many of us, as well as our family and our peers, it might be important to detect whether alcohol use is starting to become unhealthy, especially patterns that can lead to long-term conditions like liver disease. So I wanted to share a few important tools that we actually use in primary care clinics and in other specialty clinics to determine whether someone actually has unhealthy alcohol use. You can consider using this and maybe suggesting it to people you know who you might be concerned about. One example of a very well-known tool is something called the Audit-C. This is just a 3-question survey that quantitates how much someone has been drinking using these questions. And essentially, you can see the scoring table for each of the 3 questions. If someone scores a 3 for a woman or a 4 for a man, the recommendation is for them to actually see some sort of health professional, whether that's a behavioral counselor, a mental health professional, a primary care physician, their specialist, and they are eligible to receive either a brief intervention or actually more recommendations to treat their alcohol use disorder. So I think this is a very powerful tool. Even more powerful is this single question that can be asked to individuals, which states if you've ever had more than 6 drinks as a woman or 8 drinks as a man in a single occasion over the past year. If you say that this has occurred to you or you're a significant other or a person more than monthly, then there's a strong recommendation to actually seek healthcare advice from a health professional. And so I think these are very non-judgmental, evidence-based, easy ways that you can consider detecting unhealthy alcohol use, whether that be in yourself or others. Just one more point to note that alcohol use disorder is very treatable, just like nicotine disorder or any other substance abuses. And so being able to link someone to care, provide behavioral counseling, there are also medications that can be used to reduce cravings. These are things that are treatable. And I just wanted to mention that. We're going to move on to talk about cannabis or marijuana. I frequently get questions about marijuana use, particularly because in California, marijuana use is legal. But there's a lot of questions also surrounding this in the research community. Based on the little data that we have, the recommendation for people with liver disease is to not use cannabis. But it's important to acknowledge that some of the literature is mixed. Some of it actually shows that cannabis might be associated with a reduced burden of fatty liver disease. But for people who actually have liver disease already, it's also been linked to increased scarring, which is the ultimate goal of reducing. And so because of that, and the fact is that synthetic products or synthetic forms of marijuana have also been linked to liver injury, the recommendation is at this point still mixed, but to consider not using cannabis if you do have any forms of liver disease. Now that we've talked about alcohol and cannabis, I wanted to move on to prescribed medications. And this also includes over-the-counter medications. Probably the most common over-the-counter over-the-counter medication that's been linked to liver injury is one that I just mentioned, which was acetaminophen or Tylenol. This is actually the #1 cause of acute or fast liver failure, which was one of the types of liver injury I was mentioning. It causes 500 deaths a year, and 50% of the time, people don't even know that they're overdosing on it. So this is a really important fact that I think everyone should remember, that for any healthy person, whether or not you have liver disease, well, if you do not have liver disease, you should not consume over 4 grams of Tylenol, which is just the equivalent of 8 extra strength capsules or tablets over a 24-hour period. For people who have liver disease, particularly cirrhosis, this is cut in half because the liver has less reserve in these situations. It's also important to note that if you are taking Tylenol, it's wise to avoid mixing Tylenol with alcohol, because the alcohol can actually make the Tylenol more potent and dangerous to the liver. So this is a really important point to note, that particularly over-the-counter medicines, specifically Tylenol, can be linked with harm and is actually a very common cause of harm. But there are other medications, particularly prescribed medications, that it's really unclear whether they cause liver injury. We call these unpredictable forms of liver injury, or idiosyncratic forms of liver injury. And this can really happen on a host of medications. Many times, the reasons why some people get liver injury from these medications is not clear. It probably has something to do with something hereditary, or the way that the medication interacts with your body. It's very possible for multiple people not to have the same reaction to a medicine. And I gave you some examples very briefly of types of medicines, particularly antibiotics or anti-epilepsy medicines, that have been linked to liver injury. The truth is that, like I said, many people don't get reactions that others do. A really important tool that many doctors and many clinicians use to actually judge whether certain medications could be harmful is something called LiverTox. And I provided the website URL there. This is something I probably use many times a week because I'm constantly checking to see whether certain medications are safe for my patients to take. What this website does is that it can be pretty dense, but it does give some very specific advice about whether it's helpful, or it can be harmful to take certain medications, and what effects they have on the liver. If you're not sure about how to navigate this, it's important to ask your doctors or healthcare providers whether they can help guide you towards this tool, because I think it's very powerful and helpful for patients and caregivers as well. So the last group of drugs I wanted to talk about are dietary and herbal supplements. And I just classified these under non-prescribed medications. And I wanted to first point out that dietary and herbal supplement use is incredibly common. Over 50% of the population at large uses these substances, and 41% of patients with liver disease use them. So they're here to stay, but I wanted to give some important points that may help you consider or reconsider using some of these substances. So we'll first start with some supplements that have been associated with some benefits. One of them that's commonly talked about is milk thistle. So this is a compound that's been actually used to treat some forms of liver injury. One of them being a rare cause of liver injury called Amanita mushroom poisoning. What we found in patients who even don't have this form of poisoning is that it can have some benefits for a lot of different types of liver disease. But unfortunately, it hasn't been studied in as robust of a fashion as we'd like it to. And so the studies have shown that while it can be effective, in some cases it's not effective, and the data is truly mixed. So for my patients who are taking milk thistle, I generally say that if they're taking it, they can continue taking it, particularly if they feel some health benefit from it. It probably isn't harming them. But I think the question I always raise is that if someone's taking a lot of different medications, I don't always know how it's interacting with other medications. And so if they're taking many of them, I might suggest that they stop the milk thistle if it's getting in the way, or potentially affecting other medications. Another supplement, which is actually prescribed in many clinics, is vitamin E. Vitamin E has been used as a standard treatment for non-alcohol associated fatty liver disease. And so if you're using this for this indication, I'd probably mention this to your gastroenterologist or hepatologist, because it's probably important to know, and for them to be aware that you're using it. And like I said, it can have some benefits, but it also can have some harms. It has been, in some studies, linked to an increased risk of cardiovascular events like stroke, as well as certain cancers. So a high dose of it is probably not a good idea. So it's still a good, but it is a good idea to talk to your clinical team about it. Wanted to go into the sort of more negative side of the supplement industry. And I think these are just realities that we know about, and it's important to share. The supplement industry is very expensive and worth, has a lot of worth, about $32.5 billion. And it's important to recognize that this industry is not very well regulated. So while the FDA does enforce many drugs, prescribed drugs, it actually labels supplements as foods. And so it has less of an authority over many things. So while reporting of adverse events is indicated by the FDA, it doesn't reinforce whether the supplement actually has proof of health benefits. It doesn't actually go through as stringent of a process of evaluating its safety. And the advertising and sales of different supplements is not looked into closely enough for it to often affect purchases. And so this has a big effect and can lead to a lot of harm, particularly if there are players who are really not interested necessarily in improving the health and well-being of their consumers, but more interested in profits. And I'm going to give you an example of one of the back of a supplement that was being used for liver support and cleanse. You can see that there are certain things that might look really attractive, like the fact that there is milk thistle on the ingredient list. But I'll be mentioning in a few more slides that the rest of the list has a lot of products that really may not have a benefit and are not really explained, and may not have any effects on someone's health and well-being. And I'll explain why this can actually be linked to a lot of harm, because when I see this, my alarm bells really go off. And so I'll explain in the next slide that supplements have actually been linked to a lot of reports of liver damage. And there are certain groups of them that have been heavy implicators of liver damage, specifically green tea extract in supplements and bodybuilding pills. This was the report released by Consumer Reports in 2017, showed that it been actually associated with so much injury that it led to liver transplants. And so this has actually been looked into a little bit more over the past decade. There's actually a whole network of scientists and physicians who have been diligently reporting cases from their healthcare centers and communities. This study looked at 130 cases, and while that does not represent in any way, shape, or form all the cases, these are the ones they dug out in a lot of detail. And you can see the breakdown of the different cases, what type of medications or drugs were associated with these liver injuries. You can see that the most common ones associated with liver injury were anabolic steroids, which are used a lot of times by people for performance enhancement, specifically to build muscle or to look better. You can see that herbal products, traditional herbs like Ayurvedic herbs, have also been linked to liver injury. And the biggest group is actually multi-ingredient supplements. So when I was a few slides ago, when I was alluding to that long list of herbs that have things that are not clearly linked to any health benefit, that really raises concern, because it's those group of products that have actually been linked to the most amount of liver injury. So I went through these slides for the first part, and I just wanted to recap what we talked about. And so in the first few slides, I talked about a lot of the important functions of the liver that span from detoxification to filtration to making bile to storing and synthesizing protein. I alluded to the different types of causes of liver disease, as well as the fact that liver injury can be slow, can cause cirrhosis, or can be really fast. When we talked about the different substances, we first started with alcohol and marijuana, and gave you the different amounts of drinking, amount of drinks you can consider tolerating in a day or a week. But it's important that there's no maximum, there's no threshold for people who have liver disease. And you should consider screening yourself or significant others for alcohol use disorder. For marijuana, we would recommend avoiding this if you have liver disease. We moved on to talk about over-the-counter medications and prescribed medications, and found that Tylenol is something you should really avoid, particularly in high amounts. You should consider using that liver tox tool if you're concerned about a prescribed medication. And we rounded it out by talking about dietary supplements. First, the good, which are milk thistle and vitamin E. The not so good, which is the fact that the supplement industry is not very well regulated, and several different compounds have been linked to liver injury, including multi-ingredient supplements and herbs. So I wanted to pause here and give it over to Farah, so she could say a few words before our second part.
There we go. Thank you, Dr. Patel. Sorry, I was muted. I was just engrossed in your presentation because so many of these herbal and vitamins, and especially Tylenol. So I use it a lot, Tylenol, for pain and anything else. I have some questions that I've received that I will ask you. But before that, let me before we start on the second part of Dr. Patel's presentation, which I know may answer some of the questions we have, and he will talk about the best diet, exercise for healthy living. I want to do a few announcements. After 2.5 years of being confined to virtual events, I am very happy to announce that Liver Health Foundation will be hosting 3 in-person events in Los Angeles and Orange County. One of our first events is Walk for Your Liver, Los Angeles. We are returning to our favorite beachfront park, Crescent Bay Park in Santa Monica, for this walk on September 18th. The program starts at 8:30 a.m. and will end at 12. This is a family-friendly, community-oriented program. In addition to acknowledging our hardworking walkers and medal ceremony and conducting the walk, we will offer music, face painting, and balloons for kids. So to register, please visit walkforyourliverla.org. walkforyourliverla.org. The second event I want to talk about is Salute to Excellence Dinner Gala. Every year, we honor the best of the best in liver world. During an exquisite dinner gala, we will honor these fabulous doctors, and nurses, and medical professionals. This year programs will be on September 30th from 5:30 to 9:30 p.m. at Taglion Cultural Complex in LA, really in Hollywood. Some of the awards we will present during the program include Lifetime Achievement Award, Healthcare Visionary Award, Excellence in Leadership Award, Excellence in Healthcare, and a few more. These awards will be given to the most deserving doctors, nurses, and medical centers. To attend the dinner gala, please visit our website and purchase tickets at liverhealthfoundations.org. And the final in-person event of the year for us is Walk for Your Liver, Orange County. This event is held on October 16th at William R. Mason Regional Park in Irvine. Again, this event is family-friendly, community-oriented event. The park is beautiful, has a huge lake, and most people that come there stay after our walk is over for a family picnic. To register, please visit liverhealthfoundations.org. I thank you for your attention, and now we are going to return to Dr. Patel's presentation about healthy living and healthy liver. Dr. Patel, thank you again. Please go back to your presentation. Thank you.
So we decided to include a part of this talk dedicated to diet and exercise because these are questions that patients and their families really want to know about. So I hope some of these answer your questions, and I'm willing to listen to the rest of yours. I think it's really important to first think about what the goals of your diet and exercise are. I think these are really different depending on where you are. If you have a current type of liver disease like fatty liver disease, or cirrhosis, your diet is going to look really different for someone who doesn't have liver disease. So I'm going to start by talking about patients who have these conditions and then talk about prevention and just good practices when it comes to diet that might be helpful for your liver. So fatty liver disease, weight loss, dietary recommendations for fatty liver disease are becoming a lot more clear just over the past decade. And we know that the biggest effect actually happens from weight loss. And this diagram really well illustrates some of the big effects that weight loss can have. So this is a study that showed that when you go from weight loss at 5% and 7% and 10%, you can actually see a lot of different significant benefits at each of these stages. For instance, at stages between 7 to 10% weight loss, you can actually see that a lot of the inflammation from fatty liver starts to go down. From 5 to 7% weight loss, you can see a lot of the fat start to disappear. And then when you achieve about 10% or over, there's a huge reduction of fibrosis or scar tissue. So based on this study that was performed, we understand that achieving 5% weight loss, 7% weight loss, and 10% weight loss have a lot of different effects that are all additive and very helpful. And so our recommendation in the liver community, if you want to get the biggest bang for your buck, particularly if you have some scar tissue in your liver, is to actually lose 10% of your weight. Now, losing 10% of your weight is no easy task. And in addition to thinking about strategies of improving your overall caloric intake, reducing that, and increasing your physical activity, you might also wonder about specific diets you can follow, which might be independently helpful for a fatty liver disease. So this is a nice slide that goes through two important diets, which are the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet, which have been linked to improvements in fatty liver disease. You can see that the Western diet has a lot of aspects of it that can cause inflammation and increase the deposition of fat, which are the hallmarks of fatty liver disease. These include processed foods, red meats, sugary snacks and beverages, lots of fats. And what this causes is just an imbalance of less protein that a person is getting, more salt and more sugar. As opposed to this, the Mediterranean diets and the DASH diet tend to incorporate a strategy of more fruits and vegetables wholly, and a lot more compounds that increase different types of omega-3 compounds in it, which are linked to less inflammation. There's also more fiber. We'll also be talking about something called polyphenols in coming slides, but these are dietary compounds that have been linked to less inflammation as well. And so I think that following these diets can be a gateway towards achieving better health in addition to weight loss. There's also been a lot written about the impacts of exercise, and independently of the fact that it helps in losing weight, which is one real important part of maintaining your liver, we do know that exercise has a lot of other benefits. It independently can reduce inflammation. It can improve the health of your arteries and veins. It can also improve your muscle strength and cardiorespiratory fitness. And these can have really important impacts on your heart health, because we do know that people who have fatty liver disease, they're still at an increased risk of cardiovascular death and problems. And so the fact that exercise can not only help your liver, but also improve your cardiorespiratory fitness or the fitness of your heart and lungs is really important. The amount of exercise that's been linked to benefits is about 150 minutes per week. So that's about half an hour, 5 days a week. And we also know that performing exercise for 4 months or more achieves more benefit than people who are doing exercise for less than 4 months. So being able to get your body to that goal of that many minutes of exercise per week over several months can really help in achieving and improving your health from fatty liver disease. I wanted to shift and talk about cirrhosis, which has a lot more different issues when it comes to nutrition. And the fact is that many patients with cirrhosis are malnourished. And so the opposite is happening in patients with cirrhosis, where they're constantly breaking down muscle. So you want to actually increase the amount of calories and protein that they're getting in their diet. And there could be a lot of reasons why patients with cirrhosis develop malnutrition. A lot of it can be due to reduced appetite. The liver, with generating less protein, has a more of a leaky gut and can lead to less absorption of nutrients. And a lot of the imbalances that happen in cirrhosis from a hormonal standpoint can also alter how well people feel about eating and how they can digest their foods. And the truth is that these can have a lot of negative consequences when you think about the effects of malnutrition. And specifically, you can see on the slide, every single complication you can get from cirrhosis drastically increases when you're malnourished. And so being able to treat this and reverse it is critical. I really like this slide, and I'm going to spend a minute on it because I saw it at a conference recently, and I just love the philosophy of it, which is thinking about this blister pack idea for maintaining diet and exercise in patients with cirrhosis. What it does is it breaks down the recommendations into 4 parts. So tells you how many calories and protein you need, and breaks it down by calories per pound and number of grams of protein per pound. It talks about the importance of having an evening snack, because you want to break this cycle of your body breaking down muscle. And so having an evening snack that's about 200 calories can really help with restoring and making sure you're holding on to those calories. With regards to exercise, the recommendations are actually pretty similar. About 150 minutes per week of exercise. It's going to be a running theme. It'll come up later too. And enough exercise that you get a little bit short of breath. And the difference for cirrhosis patients is that there's also a specific recommendation to perform resistance training. And the reason is to maintain muscle mass. And so if you're able to do 2 sets of 15 repetitions, which is a very specific recommendation, 2 times a week, and this can be part of your exercise, that collectively has been linked to less muscle loss. And so I just really like this slide, which I saw in a presentation a few months ago, because I think it really sells this concept that we need to be thinking about our food and exercise just as valuable, if not more valuable, than medications that we use to treat liver disease and maintain our health, particularly for patients with cirrhosis. I wanted to finish off by talking about some preventive measures you can consider with regards to diet and exercise if you don't have liver disease, which might be of interest to this crowd. Specifically, I put all of them just on one slide, and I think this will hopefully hit home some of the concepts we talked about. Right now, the recommendations are to follow what it is for normal adults to have with regards to diet. And so the myplate.gov is the most recent iteration of the dietary recommendations in our country. And you can see here on the plate that fruits and veggies are still a very prominent part of the diet if you look at the plate. And what's changed in the last few years is less of an emphasis on grains and dairy typically because of unrefined carbohydrates and fat that doesn't need to be in the diet. In terms of exercise, the American Heart Association releases every few years different recommendations that are updated about exercise. You can see on the top that just as it was for the previous slides, 150 minutes a week of moderate intensity exercise is helpful of aerobic activity. But this can be switched for less exercise, less number of minutes for exercise if you're doing vigorous aerobic activity. So you could just do 75 minutes a week if it's vigorous. And for high intensity exercise, you can consider 2 days a week. So this gives a lot of nice options for people depending on their lifestyle and their time to help fit exercise that can be really beneficial for their health. And the last point I wanted to talk about, which is probably something many of us have heard, is thinking about the effects of coffee and green tea. And I put a little bit of a question mark next to this because I think the verdict is still out there. We don't really know exactly what the effects of these compounds are or what the optimal amount is to take. But we do know that coffee and green tea, likely the reason why they have some benefits on the liver is because of that compound I mentioned before called polyphenols, which have been linked to less liver inflammation. So what we do know from some studies that have come out recently that if you drink coffee over 3 times a day, you might be getting some benefit. For green tea, it's been linked to some improvement. We're really not sure what the amount is that has improved someone's liver health. So we're not really sure what recommendation to give. I think it's important that many of these studies have been done with coffee and green tea have been done in non-humans and animals that have shown some benefits in their liver once they get exposed to these compounds. But studies that have been done in humans are mostly from survey data. There could be a lot of problems with generalizing survey data and making recommendations to patients. So I think that my recommendation is that if you're taking these things, continue taking them. I wouldn't take, 8 glasses of coffee or cups of coffee thinking that's going to hugely benefit your liver, especially if your doctors may not recommend that for other reasons or if you have poor sleep habits. I would generally say that sticking to the first 2 might be a lot more successful than sticking to the third. But I think it's important to know that there is research being done on this because it's important for our patients and families to know what they can do to support their liver. So I wanted to summarize the last few slides about diet and exercise recommendations. We talked about for fatty liver disease that weight loss tends to be a pretty important goal, especially if you're trying to reduce scarring. Some diets you can consider are the Mediterranean diet and DASH diet. In terms of exercise, that golden 150 minutes of exercise per week, ideally over a 4-month period, seems to work really well. We talked about how in cirrhosis, the opposite is the case, that you have to try to take in as many calories and protein as you can and consider snacks. But the same thing holds about having 150 minutes of exercise, except you do also want to consider some resistance training. And then lastly, we talked about the importance of following the dietary and exercise recommendations from myplate.gov and AHA. We're not sure about coffee and green tea consumption, but these are probably not harmful things and they might have some benefit. And we think this is chiefly from polyphenols. So I just really wanted to thank you all for this opportunity to speak to you. It's a real passion of mine to connect with patients and families about these topics because I know they're very confusing, and I'm hoping to answer some of your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Patel. It was really fascinating, and I have some questions that I've come through. I will ask you. We see a lot of detox advertising on internet as well as on TV. Detox your liver, detox this, detox that. And unfortunately, a lot of people are using them. So is there any regulations on these ads and these products that they're kind of pushing on us, and they show our liver being healthy after we use them? So we all want to, of course, have a healthy liver.
I wish I could tell you that these things worked, but the truth is that they are not regulated. And so I think that the way I sort of phrase it to patients is that specifically if you have liver disease, I would definitely not take those things if you have liver disease, because I worry about the potential harms that can happen if you take those, especially if they, like I mentioned, have those multiple ingredients in them and it's not regulated. So I really try to tell my patients with liver disease to stay away from it. I think that if you don't have liver disease and you've talked to your doctor about it, it's it's something to consider taking if you're interested in other benefits, but you want to maybe consider having your doctor monitor your liver tests and make sure there's a goal in mind. You know, if you're worried about your health improving, you have to also know when to stop taking something, right? So I think if you carve out with your doctors a specific goal, then it's fine to take those things. But generally speaking, I'm not sure if it's the best bang for your buck to improve your health.
You had something on the slide that piqued a lot of interest, which was eggs in relation to fatty liver disease. So please explain more, because we heard eggs were bad. So after a while they said, no, they're not bad. So have eggs again for breakfast. So what's going on?
Yeah, I think that generally speaking, there is a motion to move away from animal protein in general. But if you did have to eat, I think a lot of this is, we are moving away from animal protein towards more veggies and fruits. But if you did have to eat an animal protein, it's probably best to avoid red meats. What's probably better to have if you had to have some protein that's animal based is fish and eggs are fine. So I think that it's not about avoiding eggs completely, is just thinking about avoiding red meat specifically. So if you did want to have animal proteins in your diet, fish and eggs are probably okay. It's probably better just to have more plant-based things in your diet overall, and I think that's the goal of a lot of the diets like Mediterranean and the DASH diet. But I wouldn't say eggs are bad. They're probably definitely better than red meat. So I think it's kind of a little bit of a spectrum, if that helps.
So for Dr. Patel, what is a perfect breakfast, perfect lunch?
For me, always have some. I do have some coffee in the morning, so I do get at least two cups of coffee in. I think a breakfast that like eggs are probably fine. Having some veggie with the eggs is probably a good idea if you're gonna have eggs. So what I always think about is that if you're eating a protein, make sure you're balancing it with veggies. You know what I mean, and having a fruit with it. It's also fine to have plant-based, like if you want to have oatmeal with a plant-based milk, and a fruit. That's also a good idea because you're not incorporating any animal proteins in there and still getting a lot of calories and protein in. So I think that that's what I usually would recommend for breakfast. And for lunch, having a lot of anything with a lot of veggies and fruits, so salads, sandwiches are typically good. I think the general thing is that if you're thinking about going for that animal protein, think about how you can increase the amount of veggies and fruits around it.
And veggies are better than fruits.
Fruits can be a little bit tricky because a lot of them can have high amounts of fructose in it. So and having a lot of sugar, fructose is a type of sugar. So if you don't want to go too overboard on sugar, the advantage of having veggies is that both veggies and fruits have fiber, but vegetables can have more fiber in it. And so I think vegetables tend to not have that sugar spike. And then you can also maintain a lot of fiber if you're choosing a veggie that has fiber in it. So potatoes, for instance, don't have as much fiber in it as salads and as certain other rough vegetables. So I think it depends on what veggie you're saying too, but generally I would say veggies over fruits.
And the impact of salt, I was asked, on liver. Some people really like salty food, and some people don't eat any salt at all.
Yeah, for cirrhosis patients and patients who have scar tissue, it's definitely recommended to limit your salt intake because you don't want to cause fluid retention or salt retention and cause you to develop fluid in the belly called ascites. So I think for if you have cirrhosis, it's definitely a good idea to limit the salt. I think the other, in people who don't have liver disease or have fatty liver disease, I think the verdict on salt is a little bit mixed. It's a good idea to avoid salt if you're someone who has high blood pressure, obviously, because you don't want to get that worse. And we do know that how well you control your blood pressure and diabetes is linked to your health and fatty liver disease. So if these are things that you have, like high blood pressure, it might be a good idea to go down on salt. But I think if you're someone who's relatively who's healthy, doesn't have liver disease, and doesn't have high blood pressure, I don't think it's on the high priority list of things to cut out.
And the question is about the obesity is very much kind of connected with fatty liver disease. But there are thin people, especially the question is the Asians that are normally thinner or some other people who are thin, but they may develop fatty liver disease. What is the correlation there?
Yeah, a lot of this has to do with the fact that the way we base obesity, the definitions of overweight and obesity on is something called the body mass index, which is how much you weigh over how tall you are. It's basically based on that. But the problem is it's probably not as good as something called your body fat percent, which if you've done anything related to fitness, you know that that's a little different. Like you can weigh something, a muscle, someone who's a bodybuilder can weigh 200 pounds and someone else can weigh 200 pounds, they look completely different, right? So I think the general principle is that there could be people who look underweight or look normal weight, but still have a lot of body fat on them. And so I think that it can be confusing at times. So if we are talking specifically about Asian communities, for instance, where they might have fatty liver disease, they might actually still have a lot of high body fat percent, but they may not be overweight. So I think that that is kind of what we're seeing. And so the solution to that is maybe going to a fitness professional or going to a gym and calculating your body fat percentage. And that might be higher than what you expect it to be. And there could still be goals you create to lose weight. Although we don't have as good of a targets for body fat percentage in our literature, we have more weight-based targets. I think that's kind of what my recommendation usually is.
And also, liver disease is a silent disease. So I may have liver disease, but since I'm healthy otherwise, I will never know, and I never even go and test. When is it that a person will feel that something is wrong? Is it fatigue? Is it lack of complete energy? What is it that we should all know? At least there is one sign, like heart attack has signs.
Yeah.
What are the signs for liver disease?
You know, the way I will think about that first is don't let it get to that point. You know, like go to your doctor and check your liver tests, check your liver health, get all the tests need to be done before you get symptoms. That would be my first recommendation is try to look for it before it causes a problem. If you know, if you are worried about, if you're someone who does have cirrhosis or fatty liver and you're worried about it getting worse, things that you can see when your liver gets worse, you could definitely notice fatigue. That's a big symptom. The problem is that fatigue can be caused by so many things, and so you may not know that it's your liver. The one thing that is very specific to the liver is yellowing of your eyes and yellowing of your skin and itchiness. And again, I don't want it to get to that point that you're experiencing those symptoms. And so I think those are the things you look for. Also, some people can experience fluid in the belly. Some people can experience like fluid in the legs. And these are signs that your liver disease is advanced. I do wish that there were ways of telling earlier symptoms before people get to the stages, but the way that the liver works, it's a strong organ, it has a lot of reserve until it stops working. And so I think the best thing we can all do is just try to go to your doctor, check your liver tests, see where they are, and follow them. Oh, I think you're on mute, Farah.
Sorry, I forget that I put myself on mute. There is an unusual question for you that, of course, I'm sure you're not there and you don't have a specific, but the question is Salman Rushdie, the author, was stabbed in his liver, and from what we have heard on the news, his liver has been damaged. Is it a case that since it's been knifed, whatever, stabbed, they need to have transplant, or in these cases, can a doctor go in, take the cut part out and the other part of the liver will grow? Because we have heard they say that liver grows itself back.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the first thing I always think about is, did he have a normal liver? You know, I think the ability to take out part of it and leave out another part really depends on how healthy the part you're leaving in is. And so if he, I can't speculate on Salman Rushdie's particular state of his liver disease, but if you assumed he had a normal liver, you can take out part of it and leave part of it in. And that's the beautiful thing about the liver. It has a lot of ability to regenerate. But the problem is that once you get to a lot of scar tissue and cirrhosis, that ability diminishes. And so I'm hoping that they have a chance to salvage his liver and perform something for him. And if that has to be a transplant, I hope him the best.
Yeah, it's such a shocking. The other question is, I know we are running out of time and I know your time is limited, but about the exercise. The question is, a person has heart disease, has stents and balloons, and he walks about an hour a day. And it's not a fast walk, it's not very, really real exercise, but still, that's all that person can do. Would that help?
Yeah, and I would first, thinking about the importance, I would make sure that the exercise you're doing is something approved by your cardiologist, like not something that you're doing too strenuously to impact your heart. Some people, I think that amount of exercise is probably okay as long as you're not gaining weight. The one thing I will mention for certain people who have a really difficulty time losing weight because they have some limitation doing exercise, whether that's their heart or like a bad knee or other health problems, is that talk to your doctors about seeking alternative solutions to weight loss. There are some medications you can use to reduce weight loss that can be monitored by a healthcare professional. In some cases, there are surgeries that can be done, like bariatric surgery for people who are very obese. So I think that I mentioned some solutions for losing weight and maintaining wellness, but there are other solutions too for losing weight. And I think in terms of physical activity, like I would keep it at where your heart is comfortable at, and not necessarily need to go above that.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Patel. That's all the questions we had. I have a couple more announcements. So I want to ask people, please don't forget to register to attend our educational webinar that's planned for September 14. The topic of the webinar is PFIC, which is a rare pediatric liver disease. And then also don't forget to visit our website. We have a list of all of our in-person and educational programs, and there are links that you can register. We are also on all social media, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. We are everywhere. So please visit our sites and like us. We need you to like us. Thank you for attending this webinar. Thank you, Dr. Patel, for your time, your expertise. Your presentation was absolutely excellent and answered a lot of questions. Thank you. Please stay safe and healthy. And we will see you next month, hopefully, at our upcoming event.